With a certain sense of deja vu, welcome to Indie Scot News Review of the Week, where we look at some of the significant stories from the past 7 days from a Scottish perspective. Today's guests are blogger and co-presenter of The Cauldron, Denise Findlay, and David Henry from the Scottish Sovereignty Research Group. Welcome, Denise and David. We have to begin with the news, the main story from the avoidable tragedy as more refugees die in the Channel. David, you made a point about the UK responsibility for those fleeing war, and Alan Ferrier wrote, "They're not coming to claim our benefits, they're coming to escape our bombs." Has the Westminster government lost all sense of humanity?
Yes, I think they have. I think I wonder if people remember that terrible picture of the young child that had washed up on the shore a few years ago, lifeless, just before Christmas, funny enough, about the same time as year. And it profoundly upset me to think that people were fighting to try and get away from what was then an active war zone, and we weren't helping them, and yet we had helped bomb them. So we've got our priorities completely wrong. And I think this links to foreign policy. And we've heard it from Boris. They cheer and support cutting foreign aid. This is the Nigel Farages of this world, because we should spend the money in our country. These countries need help a lot more than we do. We obviously need to look after our own people as well. But it's a false economy. It's a false economy to think that you're cutting and saving money by not helping much poorer countries. Because what in fact is going to happen is you are going to create more need and more desire to get away from those situations. And I don't blame refugees or migrants. And I don't actually label people migrants or refugees. I simply see fellow human beings. And I think we all should be doing that. So yes, I think it is a failure of our foreign policy. We put far too much effort and money into bombing countries, invading them, and regime change, and we do far too little to help countries improve the quality of life for their citizens.
Denise, an absolute tragic story.
Yes, and all too often it happens over and over again. And it really goes back, I believe, into the first Iraq war. This is when we started these terrible foreign adventures and bombing adventures. And of course, Alex Salmond, who's now leader of Alba, he opposed the first Iraq war, and he was right. And they came in, even Charles Kennedy, remember Charles Kennedy was very much opposed. And despite millions of people marching against, they carried on with it. And this is the foreign policy linked to America, following America into these adventures. And we've carried on since with Libya, with Syria. And this is just made the whole region unstable. People that had quite good lives are now find themselves as refugees. And in Afghanistan is the latest disaster of foreign policy intervention. This plight of women in Afghanistan is actually heartbreaking, and women have been executed, and they're not allowed education. So really we need to get out of these regions and just provide them with peacekeeping and with economic aid.
Yeah, absolutely. George Kerrivan, looking down the road to an independent Scotland, a post-independent Scotland, mentioned the path we should be taking. And he expressed concern about Stuart MacDonald and Alan Smith in particular, who he said are showing signs not just of embracing NATO membership wholeheartedly, but of repositioning an independent Scotland as a strategic player in any new Cold War against Russia and China. Are we in danger of replacing Westminster with Washington, Ian? Oh, Ian.
David.
Yes,
there's no Ian.
That's okay. No, my middle name's Ian, so that's okay. It still works. Absolutely. It's quite clear that what's happening to, sadly, the largest party in Scotland is it's becoming part of the Westminster system and the Westminster mindset. And Scotland, if they get their way, Scotland is going to be an independent country in name only, and nothing is going to actually change. The only difference is the same policies are going to come from Edinburgh rather than from London. I don't think Scotland needs to play the role like the UK has. The UK is a dying empire, a dead empire in many respects, and it wants to project power and be a powerful leader in the world, on the world stage. And you have to look at that comes from our history, where when we had the British Empire, we controlled about a third of the world's economies. Now, most of them have now become independent and left. And funny enough, none of them have applied to come back and be run by the British. So that should tell us all something.
Yeah.
So, yes, I think we are very much in danger of replicating all the disasters that Westminster has created and then recreating them ourselves, which I don't think is what the people in Scotland actually support.
Okay. Denise?
Yeah, I noticed there was a newspaper story about Alan Smith and Stuart MacDonald, and they were going to meet with MI5 to discuss threats from Russia to Scottish democracy. And you're like, hold on a minute. MI5 is the British Security Services. You're meant to be Independence Party MPs. Why are you going to them for help? Yeah. It was ridiculous. Yeah. So, they seem to be in love with the whole Westminster system, the power, the being one of the guys down in Westminster. I think that when we're independent, and I imagine this will happen because this is the instincts, I would say, of the Scottish people, that we're not going to be bombing countries. I think we should do peacekeeping and only things with UN resolutions, and then of course of our own defense. So I don't imagine for one moment that we will have a foreign policy that is even remotely similar to the UK foreign policy when we're independent.
That is very much the Irish model, and they have trod that path very, very successfully. Moving on, Denise, I'll stay with you for a moment. Was this the week when the Americanization of the NHS began in earnest?
Unfortunately. So the bill that was passed, the Health and Social Care Bill, that bill is an English-only bill. So SNP MPs and Alba MPs, I know Alba MPs didn't vote on it because it's an English-only bill. But it will have consequences for Scotland because the dangerous bill that has been put through is the Health and Social Care Bill. Is the Internal Market Bill. Now, the Internal Market Bill allows Westminster to interfere in any devolved area. So the Health and Social Care Bill really makes an internal market in England in the NHS. So this means Westminster using the Internal Market Bill can now make an internal market and interfere in Scotland, which they're really quite likely to do. Westminster can do this because power devolved is power retained, and Westminster has the power. The idea that we can defend devolution against these British nationalist conservatives is pie in the sky. We should not be defending devolution. What we should be doing is taking independence, and we should be getting independence. So I think now devolution is over, and it's independence that we need.
David?
And all our public services are actually in threat. It's not just the NHS. Every single one can be overridden by Tories.
I think the NHS is probably the last public service that is still being run for the benefit of the public. And it's a huge prize if private companies can get their hands and fingers into it. And it's already started. So people shouldn't think this isn't the road of travel that the Conservative government has already indicated. I mean, I think it was interesting. There was a book written by Jeremy Hunt, and it was about the privatization of the NHS and all the upsides of private insurance. I think people should think very carefully. In the US, if you want to call an ambulance, it'll cost you $5,000. So you have to have insurance. If you can't afford the insurance, you're going to get a bill. That's just to get to the hospital, $5,000. That's what they charge. People come out with a serious illness, and even if it's a car accident and they get their legs fixed and they recover, the bills they get are enormous. That is where we're going. If we stay in the UK, that is what the Conservatives want. There's huge pressure to privatise the health service and to give it to private companies, just like they did with the railways. Incidentally, that's turned out to be a complete disaster, and I think you'll find most of them are now back being run for the public under a different contract. But the idea that the health service can be turned into a market where profit is what people are focusing and tracking and aiming for is ridiculous. Scotland rejects this over and over again. It's why we don't vote Conservative in large numbers. We don't agree with this. So yes, I'm afraid the Internal Market Bill is designed to harmonise the powers from Westminster across the whole of the UK, which doesn't matter what Nicola Sturgeon and the Scottish Government say. They have no power to stop it. They're effectively no more powerful than a local authority. Local authorities can't make laws. They can only deliver them. And that is exactly the problem we've got with the Scottish Parliament. It can only deliver what it's given from Westminster, unless, of course, we decide to take our future in our own hands. So yes, the Internal Market Bill is going to be a huge problem. And there's no doubt that if we continue in the UK, I believe that is what they have planned, to take the NHS and sell it off bit by bit. They'll tell us that it's going to be more efficient. That's what they'll say. They'll say it doesn't make any difference if it's a private company or a public organization. Yes, it does, because the focus is on profits, not on healthcare. So absolutely, we are in grave danger. And yes, this is, if you like, the first sign of what's coming.
Well, speaking of Westminster, Boris Johnson has been in the news this week, and the question is, have we reached peak Boris? Is the Tory leader about to be replaced, Denise? Have you been reading the tea leaves?
Well, I think that the Tories will be very ruthless in getting rid of people when they do want rid of him. But at the moment, I think he's okay, because I think the polls are still okay for him, and Labour is a complete bin fire. But he has shown himself to be quite a, joke, a bumbling joke. And one thing I was surprised about was that everybody said before he became prime minister what a great communicator he was, and he's a terrible communicator. He relies on anecdotes and metaphors that people don't really get. It's his brand of humor, and he seems to be incapable of being serious, and he also seems to shall we say, not be able to hold his water very well. And he apparently told European journalists that he had buyer's regret over marrying Carrie. So I can imagine that was a rather frosty breakfast the next day. And he also, when he was speaking to these people in Ireland, he was very, you'll never have to fill in a form. And apparently Frost, when he told Boris the realities of, the customs border, the border situation in Ireland, Johnson was completely shocked. And this was just before it came up to the signing of the deal, and he was shocked. He hadn't bothered with the details. So I feel like he doesn't think in any details, very superficial, and he's got by because he's rich. He went to public school, and he just blusters and has loads of confidence, and people just take him at his own. He thinks he's great. So other people think he is as well. So but personally, I don't care which Tory leads the Tories, because they're all Tories and they're all as bad as each other. And I don't think people in Scotland, we should be focusing on getting independence and not having to care about the next Tory leader.
Yeah. He's low on fact and big on bluster, David. But do you see any potential replacement lining up?
I think I agree with Denise on the issue that it doesn't really matter who they replace. The Conservatives, I do think they'll get somebody, if there is a major coup. And I actually think what's going on at the moment, first of all, the front runners, which was Gove before, and people talk about Jacob Rees-Mogg, which you begin to think, can you really see him as Prime Minister? And unfortunately, yes, I can actually. If we can have someone like Boris Johnson. I was there when he made his first speech in the House of Commons. I was in the gallery, and I watched him for the 3 hours, Boris. And at the end of that 3 hours, and I watched him play to his own crowd. He didn't answer a single question with a proper, accurate answer. So he showed no respect to the process of government and of Parliament. But then, are we surprised? If you remember last 2 years ago, Joanna Cherry's case taking the UK government to court. And I was there when, throughout the Scottish case in the Court of Session, and they had a big argument over the evidence that had been handed in at 11 o'clock the night before, like 2 or 3 days late. And there was a big argument whether it should be allowed in, because clearly the other side hadn't seen what was in it. And anyway, I sat and listened to it, and I could tell the judge wanted it through. He didn't want to hear it, and I thought they're going to lose, and then it'll go to appeal. So that's exactly what happened. However, it was when I heard the contents of that evidence, it sort of dawned on me that this might have been a very bad idea for them to have sent it in the first place, because they hadn't thought it through. It was quite ridiculous what they did. It was very unprofessional, and absolutely, Boris doesn't do detail.
No,
he just does headline grabbing, jovial, and everyone thinks, oh, isn't he funny? He can use a little bit of Latin here and there. Yeah, but no, he doesn't do detail. And unfortunately, in serious times, you need serious people. And that's not what we've got. So to come back to your question, do we think it's near? I think it's near the end, because I think it's only so long that I think some people think he's maybe a genius. He's either an absolute fool or he's a genius.
Secret genius.
Well, I'm pretty certain the evidence is beginning to show that he's certainly not a genius. No. And people will come to the conclusion, if he's not a genius, maybe he shouldn't be Prime Minister. No. And I think COVID has exposed him. I think Brexit, we're going to get this great deal, get Brexit done. Remember all this nonsense. Now, the trouble for the Tories, and I think the money is beginning to run out. You know, there's no more big contracts to be given out to anybody. No. So I think that is what is going to do him in. Eventually, enough people are going to realize that the writing's on the wall. We need to leave. We're not going to get re-elected if he is in power. And the one thing I like about the Tories, there's only one thing. They're not shy at getting rid of their leadership. They not only stab you in the back, they stab you in the front as well. They're not shy. They did it to Thatcher. They did it to Theresa May. They're going to do it to him. So the clock is ticking.
Yeah, we're probably giving them enough airtime. Enough of Boris already. Moving on to Denise. This week in women's rights, Stephen Payton accused of misogyny in the National. Girls at Kelso High School avoiding going to the unisex toilets. Boys at Jedburgh Grammar School waving sanitary products. What are the state of women's rights this week?
Yeah, I think every morning you kind of wake up and think, what new hell is there going to be today? And we know that this is going to happen. We know that giving at unisex toilets is an incredibly bad idea for girls, because in other countries, developing countries, we actually fundraise to get girls' toilets for them so they can be educated. Now we have girls in Scotland who are not eating or drinking all day to avoid going to the toilet, which is going to affect their education, because we know that children need food for their brain to work, basically, and not going to school at all if they're menstruating because of the not having privacy or dignity. That's what we're denying our girls. So we campaign for toilets for girls elsewhere, but we don't have toilets for girls in Scotland. And that is the shame, I would say, the shame of the Scottish government, the shame of the councils bringing these policies in. And just this week, we heard about this survey that's getting to send It's called a census survey, and it's getting sent to all the Scottish school pupils, 14 to 16-year-olds, asking them for intimate details of their sex lives.
Okay.
And it's really appalling what's happening to girls. It's sexualization of children, and then the toilets issue, not giving them privacy, dignity, or safety. And so what I would want to ask people, so yesterday Alba passed a motion on the issue of the toilets, and we've called on a stop of this policy, and the Scottish Sex Minister involved is held to account. But I would make this plea. I would ask everybody watching that wants to protect girls and wants to protect women's rights, if you could consider standing in the local authority elections as a council candidate, because the councils are the ones implementing this nonsense. The whole of the Scottish society, third sector and the government seem to be quite captured by this ideology, and it's dangerous for girls and it's dangerous for women. It takes away our rights. So if you could consider standing, anyone that's outraged by this, then we can do something. We can really do something to stop this.
David, you've been involved in Scottish politics for a long time. How on earth has the Scottish government gone down this path?
Well, it's been, I think the Scottish government and the party that's in power has been encapsulated and captured by a very small but powerful lobby, which has been pushing this transgender and trying to undermine equality. I mean, one of the things I wanted to point out, that councils have guidelines. That's what they've issued, guidelines to schools. Guidelines are not rules. They're not rules and they're not laws, and they do not have to be followed. Guidelines are there specifically for guidelines. And I think actually the schools themselves, and this goes to the headmasters out there that might be watching, they're the ones that will be held liable, because it's not the Scottish government that's issued guidelines told the councils to issue the guidelines to go to the schools. The schools are the ones that are implementing it, and it's them that will be held legally liable for anything that goes wrong. So I certainly think, I feel there's one group of people that have been completely ignored in all of this. First of all, you don't have to be a woman to stand up for women's rights. Men can do that too. I believe in equality for all. But parents seem to have been completely cut out of this process. From the survey going direct to teenagers who are under the age of consent, asking them about their sex lives. I think that's quite outrageous. And if I was a parent, I'd want to know about it. And if I was finding out, and from what I can gather, these schools in the recess have been rearranging their toilet blocks and turning them into unisex toilets, spending, I have to say, public money, ripping things out and putting new things in, when we've got other things that they need to spend money on. And the parents only find out after the kids find out, when they go back to school and they tell their parents that the toilets have all been changed. Well, what on earth has gone on to parents' rights? They've been completely ignored. So I do believe we need to focus on, instead of lobby groups going into schools and getting grants from the Scottish government to help them go into schools, because it does seem to be that is part of the problem. The Scottish government is giving grants to lobbyist groups who are then using that money to then go in and lobby. So it's like a virtual circle. And in all of this, parents have been completely cut out of the process. I believe parents are generally very sensible. They want the best for their kids, and they should certainly be part of this process.
Okay. We're going to move. Time's running out, I can see. Denise, I'm going to move along to something that has been happening in the blogosphere this week, and something that you've actually been responsible for. You've published a series of very detailed blogs covering the timeline of recent controversial events in the SNP and Scottish government. What was behind your publication of these blogs now?
Well, it was the anniversary of this campaign to have, what we were calling the good guys elected onto the NEC and the committees of the SNP. I think at the time I was rather naive, and throughout the year I've been understanding better the nature of power and what's going on. And I just wanted a record of it. I wanted a record of the Salmond inquiry. Now, I know that if we look at this Craig Murray situation, who reported the defence case and is now being incarcerated and sought in prison, who, you know, that they don't want this information out there.
No.
And so I wanted to, so when I was writing that part of it, of course, I had to be very careful. But it was like the way that the power media manipulation has gone on this year, and the way that Nicola Sturgeon runs the SNP. And I just wanted to record it from what I had seen and my understanding of what happened. And then I ended on very upbeat, because I wanted to say that, you know, Alba is there, and the people in Alba are totally devoted to independence and to getting independence. So don't lose hope, people. Join Alba, and we can get independence. There's plans for it.
David, you were a part of the Good Guys campaign, were you not?
Yes, I was.
Could you, for people who have maybe forgotten or never heard of it, what exactly was it about? What was the basic idea?
Well, the internal elections are at the autumn, and what a difference a year makes. So there was multiple people standing for, I think there was hundreds of candidates. I mean, Denise will remember it. But there was hundreds of candidates, I think, standing. And of course, normally in a party of 100 and something thousand members, as it probably was then, I very much doubt it's anywhere near that now. You really don't know who most people are. You'll know people in your local area, but and you might know some of the elected officials, such as MPs or MSPs, if they're standing for roles. But the vast majority of the others and the other branches across the country, you'll not have a clue who they are or what they stand for. So the idea was, and after seeing what had happened with the party and major glaring errors by the NEC, and what would appear to be rule breaking and bullying and all sorts of things going on, it came that we should come up with a list to help people find the ones that are good, and that are going to put independence first and have the party's best interests at heart. So yes, I was part of it, and it was a very energetic campaign, and I did extremely well and came a very close second, with just short of 89 votes out of thousands of votes cast. So it was a great experience, and I think SNP Good Guys got about 45% of the NEC. But that didn't give them enough to fix things, and things went from bad to worse, because as soon as they got a new treasurer, who was a great guy and is still in the SNP, which was Douglas Chapman MP, and they tried to dig into the finances, because I'd been chasing the finances by that time more than 6 months, knew they were missing. Didn't get fobbed off, didn't fall for the nonsense that had been given.
You're talking about the ring-fenced fund here.
Oh, yes, it's interwoven in the accounting units. I says, well, that's money laundering then, isn't it? So that would actually be worse. So I knew that this was totally meaningless nonsense, and I can't believe people fell for it. But people had fallen for it. They believed in the leadership. They believed that they were being truthful, and that we're all aiming at the same thing. And anyway, it turned out, as the evidence shown, that's not the case.
No.
Now you fast forward to this year, and you find that they cannot find candidates to stand for some of the key roles. That's how disengaged and how damaged the SNP now is.
Oh dear.
And it's a great pity, because I just want to remind everyone, there are still good people in the SNP. And they're all, many of them, it took me quite a while to come to the conclusion that I was wasting my time. And actually, the thing that's really made me jump, apart from I knew Alba was coming at the last minute, was I'd asked my MSP in a public meeting in front of lots of witnesses to stand up and make a public statement against women being bullied. In mind, I had Joanna Cherry, my MP, who at the time was again suffering bullying and all sorts of nonsense. And he refused. He actually said, no, I'm not going to do that. At that moment, I knew I was never voting for him again. And in fact, now most of the people in that meeting, and there were women there as well, have all left the party. So the SNP has damaged itself. And I just hope that somehow it can be repaired.
Yeah.
But I fully support the Alba Party. I'm very pleased to be part of it now.
Yeah.
It's great to see proper democracy, party democracy, proper discussions. We don't all agree on everything, but we're respectful, and sometimes you learn something you hadn't thought about. That's the way it should be. It's the way the SNP used to be.
Yeah. Well, let's end on a positive note. Denise, you were at the National Council yesterday.
Yes. Yes.
And you were also there, David, even though the SNP, for some odd reason, had chosen to hold a virtual conference on the same weekend. What came out of the council? What positives can we take from that?
Okay, so we had quite a few positive motions. So the first one is independence, of course, which Kenny McAllister did. And there's a plan that once the council elections are over and we have our councillors elected, we're going to call a convention, which is the first step in a process to get it for our independence, because there's plenty of routes to independence that don't include a Section 30. So we're going to do that. There was motions on the Scottish currency, because we had an economic assembly and they decided that we are going to have a Scottish currency to be able to control our economy properly. Yeah. So all the details of a Scottish currency will be worked out, but I'm really happy about that, because I was kind of wanted a Scottish currency. There was motions on this NHS situation, the situation we talked about. Yeah. So I think independence is the answer, really, to everything. There was motions on rail. And of course, there was the motions on the issue of the toilets, which Caroline McAllister proposed and Michelle Fern second. So it was a very positive conference, because and there was a report from the local government convener about how we're going forward to the local government elections. So again, anybody that wants to stand as candidates, please come forward. And so it was the most upbeat, in positive, very positive, like looking forward to the hope of getting Scottish independence. And I do think it is the only hope. I don't think the SNP any longer can be credibly called a vehicle to independence. And I really seriously would like and hope people will join Alba and help us fight for independence, because we can succeed.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a positive message. David, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, the one thing is that for our local council campaign, what I was really pleased to see is how much work and thought's gone into the 5 key points, which is to basically to tackle poverty and to improve basic people's lives at every level, from schooling to transport to housing. There's a thing in there to make sure that lower income houses get a grant of £500, I think it was, each year. I think this is because we do have a crisis. Brexit has created a crisis. COVID made it even worse. Alba has a positive view to help ordinary people's lives. So that's the positive message that came out of it for me.
Brilliant, brilliant. We're going to have to close there. Denise, David, thank you so much for taking the time on this Sunday. Finally, where can we find you on the internet? Where can we find you on the blogosphere or on Twitter?
Well, I use my own name. So if you do Denise Findlay on Twitter, at Grace Brody, which is actually my granny's name. And also I have a blog which is called denise.findlay. .org, denise.findlay.org, and that's where you'll find the Good Guys blog. It's actually called Everybody Knows the War is Over. Everybody Knows the Good Guys Lost.
Okay, we talked about last week's
11 parts. 11 parts.
Yeah. A very, very interesting read. I can highly recommend that. David, where can we find you?
Yeah, I've got 2 things. So I too use my own name on Twitter. So it's because of a mistake, and I didn't know what I was doing all those years ago. It's David D. Henry, so I don't know who the D is, but anyway.
Well, I called you Ian earlier, so perhaps.
Yeah, well, I mean, you can probably change it, but I never have. And I'm obviously a founding member of the Scottish Sovereignty Research Group, SSRG. So we've got a website, which is scottishsovereigntyresearchgroup.org. Despite a friend of mine telling me it's the longest domain name in the world and you need to change it. And I thought, well, it's too late. We've done it now. And SSRG had already been. But yes, we're developing policies and working with all the parties, actually, and experts to deliver Scotland's independence and economic case and policies. But we don't claim to have all the answers. We just ask the awkward questions and get the experts to tell us the answers.
Excellent. Listen, thanks very much to you both, and enjoy the rest of your Sunday. Bye now.
Thank you.